Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm starting a new series on Ansible. This would be focused on someone who is absolute beginner in this field. In this first video, I would be talking about what is Ansible, why to use Ansible, some of the use cases where we can use Ansible, and how to set up your local machine, that is a Windows laptop, to run Ansible using WSL, that is Windows Subsystem for Linux. By the end of this video, I'm hoping that you would be able to explain what Ansible is and how to set up your local machine to run Ansible, run few Ansible ad-hoc command against your local machine. So let's get started. Okay, so first of all, what is Ansible? Ansible essentially is an IT automation tool, and in DevOps world, it comes under configuration management tools. So there are different categories of tools identified within DevOps ecosystem, and Ansible falls under configuration management tool. Now, personally, I have used it for more than just configuration automation. So before we look into what we can use Ansible for, let me show you a very interesting website. It's from digital.ai. It's called DevOps Periodic Table, DevOps Tools Periodic Table, actually. So it's quite interesting. If you see, they have created a periodic table similar to what we have in chemistry for different elements. Instead of elements, we have DevOps tools here, and they are categorized based on their functionality within CI/CD pipeline or in a DevOps ecosystem. So if you see here, tool number 25, which is RHA, Red Hat Ansible, it falls under configuration automation category, right? So we have different categories for example, release management, security, source code control management, testing, cloud, etc. So Ansible is essentially categorized as a configuration automation tool within this whole DevOps ecosystem. Now, in an IT firm, or if you're working for some organization and you're looking after their IT infrastructure, you're mainly concerned about provisioning the new servers, making sure the configurations on those servers are accurate. So essentially configuration management of those servers or instances, continuous delivery, application deployment, and also making sure that your infrastructure is security compliant, because security is very important these days, right? So Ansible essentially can help you do all of these things, because when you're doing provisioning, you're running a bunch of commands, right? You run in a sequence in order to spin up a new server, or to configure something on your server, you essentially are running commands on your machine, right? Similarly, application deployment requires you to run something on the server, security compliance if you're patching something. So all of these can be managed and handled by Ansible. Ansible can also interact with external tools, for example, like ServiceNow. If you have data about your servers in CMDB, a ServiceNow can fetch you that information, and based on that, you can create a dynamic inventory of your servers and do some operations against them. So that's what Ansible is in a nutshell, and we can say Ansible is an IT automation tool at bare minimum. Now, why to use Ansible? As we noticed in that periodic table that we were looking at earlier, we had different tools available under category for Ansible, which was configuration automation. Now, if I go back here and you see, we have Terraform, we have Chef, and now we have AWS Cloud Formation, Puppet, Packer, and HashiCorp Consul. So essentially, all of these tools comes under same category, which is to manage and automate your configuration. Now, why to use Ansible? Obviously, each tool has its own unique advantages, and there might be some disadvantages relatively comparing other tools. Ansible is simple and easy to use, as you would notice when we move further along this journey and we create more videos on this. You would understand it's very easy to read Ansible playbook, right? So even if you're someone who is not that familiar with programming, and you're running some other person's written playbook, and if they have named their tasks carefully, it would be very easy for you to understand what they are trying to do. Ansible is written in YAML format. So Ansible playbooks, you can write tasks, roles, or very complex Ansible playbook using YAML, and it would be quite easy for you to understand as compared to some other languages out there. Strong focus on security and reliability. Ansible, although is an open source software, and it was originally written by Michael Dehan, and in 2015 Red Hat acquired this software. Later on, Red Hat was acquired by IBM. So as we speak currently, Ansible is an IBM tool. And it's quite secure and reliable in a sense that you don't have to create new things just to run Ansible, right? So Ansible is agentless and you don't have to create new IDs or account or new authorizations or authentication schemas within your system. Ansible can run in a decentralized way where you can use your existing OS credential to control access to remote machines. So let's move on. So now you see on the left side we have a bash script which basically creates a user on a Linux system if the user doesn't exist. And on the right side, this is an Ansible playbook which is written in YAML. Now, if you see the code on the left side is quite large, and on the right side, you're just using an built in module from Ansible to create a user called Peter, and his name is Peter Parker. Although on the left hand side you see we had to write a longer script. And the good thing about Ansible is that let's say you have 100 servers where you want to create this user. If you are trying to run it using script, you would have to first transfer this script to the 100 servers manually, and then you would have to run that script on each server individually. Even if you are, let's say, using remote SSH and passwordless SSH concept, maintaining this script for different OS can be difficult. You might have to maintain a different script to create a user in Linux as compared to AIX or Ubuntu, right? On the other hand, for most of non-Linux operating systems, Ansible would have same module. So other than Windows, if you want to create an user on a server, you can just use Ansible built-in user module and the user will get created. The other important thing is idempotency. Obviously, whenever we are writing our scripts manually, it's very difficult to achieve idempotency, right? So don't create something if it is already there, right? So Ansible has this strict rule where it if you are following or using inbuilt Ansible modules, most of the time they would be idempotent. And if you are trying to write your own modules within Ansible or any scripts as such, I think idempotency is something that you should always consider. So this explains like how easy it is to write an Ansible playbook rather than managing your code manually through scripts. Now let's talk about a use case for Ansible. So let's say you have a 4 server running on your infrastructure, 2 web and 2 database servers, and you have a task to restart them, right? So while you're restarting, you need to make sure that you're restarting them in an order. So let's say you want to, while stopping or shutting down, you want to shut down web servers first and then the DB servers. And when you are starting up your system, you want to start up DB server first and web servers afterwards. So this is a quite usual use case, and managing these kind of things through Ansible is like very easy. You would understand that when we create playbooks later on, we can just create inventories within Ansible, and then we can just start and stop the servers based on the requirements. So this is one use case where we can use Ansible. Now let's make it a bit more complicated. Let's say these hosts are dynamically provisioned and removed. Let's say if your loads are high on your system or application, you provision dynamically 2 more web servers. Now you have 4 web servers and 2 database servers. In that case also, you're maintaining that information in an external tool, something similar to, let's say, ServiceNow CMDB. Ansible can dynamically create inventories by reading external APIs from ServiceNow, just for an example, or some database where you are keeping your host inventories, and dynamically can add those hosts to, let's say, for example, web group and DB group based on those host properties and do the restarts for you. So this is just one example where we can use Ansible. Like I mentioned, we can use Ansible for provisioning if we want, patching, security management, application deployment, software deployment, etc. Right? Okay, so this was a brief introduction about what Ansible is, where does it stands in DevOps ecosystem. We looked at that DevOps website where we had that periodic table for different DevOps tools from digital AI. You can basically create your own pipeline. So let's say, for example, you can choose the tools that you're using, and you can look into it like where do they fit, and you can visualize your pipeline using their tool. So I think it's a great website worth sharing. Anyways, so we talked about what Ansible is, why to use it. We looked at a very simple use case where we can use Ansible. Now in this video, I am also trying to cover how do we set up Ansible on our local machine, right? Because Ansible itself cannot run on Windows machine. So if you have a Windows laptop and you're trying to learn Ansible, you cannot run Ansible playbook directly on your machine. And generally, if you notice, people recommend creating virtual machines. So you can download VirtualBox from Oracle and create a virtual machine on your system. then install Ubuntu in that virtual machine, and then set up Ansible on that. So that's a good option if you want. There is a newer option these days available, which is Windows Subsystem for Linux. We can use that to set up Ansible on our local machine. And I will share the link for WSL videos description. You can read about what is Windows Subsystem for Linux. There is WSL 1 and WSL 2, and we are going to use WSL 2, which is the newer version. So in order to install WSL, if you are using your own or personal laptop, all you have to do is run this command in PowerShell, WSL-install. Okay, so I've opened my PowerShell and I'm going to run WSL-install command here. Now in my case, Ubuntu is already installed on this system, so it did not download a newer image from internet. It has automatically launched Ubuntu on my system, and now I'm inside my Linux machine running on a Windows host. So if you see here, it's a Linux machine now, x86-64, right? So it's a Linux based machine. Now if I try to run Ansible command on this server, so let's say if I say Ansible version, it says Ansible is not found, but it can be installed with. So now if you see here, it automatically gave me the command that I need to run in order to install Ansible. Okay, so if you see here, by default, I'm not able to install Ansible. So what I have to do is I have to add Ansible's PPA into my machine. So let me just do sudo apt update so that my archives are updated. Next, I would run sudo apt install software properties common, which is already installed. And now I would add that PPA for Ansible using this command sudo add apt repository -yes -update and then PPA Ansible/Ansible. It will take some time to update. And once that is done, you can run sudo apt install Ansible. And now it has started to install Ansible binaries on my WSL machine. Okay, so my Ansible binaries have been installed, and let me run the same command again now. So now if you can see my Ansible -version command is successful, I got the Ansible version. I got module path where all the modules by default are present, and executable location. This is the Ansible binaries used currently, and this is my Python version. So now you saw that how easy it is to install Ansible on your WSL machine. So let me just run basic command. So let's say, let me create a host file. So, okay. So let's see if it works, because otherwise we'll have to create passwordless SSH from localhost to localhost. So let's just try that. So let's just try to SSH. Okay, that's great. So now this is also I wanted to share with you. Now you have installed Ansible and you want to run Ansible playbooks. You need some remote target also, right? You need something to test your code against. So let's say you want to create a directory. WSL is your controller. How about the remote host? What I do generally, I make the WSL machine as my remote also. So you can run your code against your same machine. So you can use your WSL as a remote host also. For that, you have to first enable port 22, because Ansible would need SSH for you to connect to the remote host. So first we need to make sure that OpenSSH server is installed on the server. This OpenSSH server will enable us to run SSH from WSL host. So now once the OpenSSH server is installed, you can run sudo service SSH start. This will start the SSH host. Now let me try to do SSH to my local host again. So now you can see that I got connected to my local host directly using SSH. There is one thing missing here, although it's asking for the password, right? So in the next video, when we talk about Ansible playbooks, we will also set up a passwordless SSH connection between our controller and remote host, which in this case is same host, but you still need to have that SSH connectivity enabled. So let me clear my screen and let's go to the Ansible folder and let's create a host file. So in the host file, we will add one entry. We are saying we have one host that we are working against. It's called localhost. Let me save it. So if I do ls here, I have one file in this directory. It's called host.ini. Let me try to run an Ansible ad-hoc command. So the way we can run Ansible ad-hoc command is straightforward. You can just type Ansible, which is the binary name, -mm is the module. Now, what is a module? So all of Ansible's related documentation is available at docs.ansible.com. Personally, I think you don't have to go anywhere else. Docs.ansible.com has everything that you need to learn, understand, and use Ansible. Okay, so in this website, there is a link for collections. You can click on it, it will redirect you to collection index. So collection is a newer concept in Ansible. We will be talking about it, but you can think of collection as a way to distribute modules, codes by different vendors, right? So Amazon AWS can have their own modules for Ansible. Cisco can have their own modules for use in Ansible. Then you can have community-led modules which are maintained by Ansible enthusiasts, F5, IBM, Grafana, so Google. So you can have different vendors maintaining their collections in their namespaces. And most of the traditional modules that we are talking about here are under Ansible.built-in. So if you are a beginner and you are trying to just learn Ansible, you can go to Ansible.built-in collection, and then here you can get the modules that we are talking about. So let's say I want to just check if I can ping a remote host. So I just control F and searched for ping, and you can see that there is a ping module that tries to connect to a host and verify that a usable Python is available and returns a Pong status. So let's go back to our command line, and let's say we are trying to use that ping module and we are trying to use it against the inventory file provided in host.ini, which has localhost, and we want to run it against all hosts. So you have to also specify the hosts. All means everything in the host.ini. We can also create hosts based on groups. We can also specify the exact host name. We will be talking about inventory in next videos, but for this video's purpose, all you can think of inventory is the list of hosts that you can provide to Ansible to run against, and you can also group those hosts based on particular group name. And if you specify the all keyword here, that would mean that Ansible will think that we have to run this module against all the hosts provided in the inventory. So command is Ansible all -m, the module name ping -i inventory. And now Ansible doesn't know which user to use, right? So in my case, user is VC Tech Talks. So I can say, okay, use VC Tech Talks. If I don't specify the user, it will also use the VC Tech Talk because that is the user that is executing the playbook. So although in this case, I'm running the playbook as a VC Tech Talks user, I can ask Ansible to use some other user to connect to the remote host. But in our case, we are using the same user to connect to the remote host. So we will say use user VC Tech Talks. Now, if you notice or remember previously when we tried to use SSH to connect to the local host using VC Tech Talk user, it asked us for the password. So now if you see here, if I run this playbook, it will fail. Now if you see here, changed false, host unreachable, failed to connect to the host via SSH, permission denied, unreachable true. Now, why did that happen? Because Ansible doesn't have any credential to connect to the remote host, and we have not enabled passwordless SSH yet. So what we have to do is we need to tell Ansible that ask for the password before executing the playbook. Now, in this case, as soon as I added --ask password, Ansible has prompted me to provide SSH password. Now, I will enter my SSH password here and press enter key. Now in this case also it's failing because it's looking for an SSH password program. Let's do that. So now this SSH password program has been installed. Let me clear my screen. Let's rerun the same program again, rather the command again. Now if you see here, this time the Ansible command is successful. Changed is false because we did not do anything on the remote host. We just ran a ping command and the response was Pong. Now we can run a more complicated, bit advanced module also. It's called Setup. So let's go back to Ansible website now. So now let's say if I want to gather fact about the remote host. So in this case, if you see here, I have a setup module which gathers facts about the remote host. It gives me information what is on the remote host, what is the operating system type, what is IP, what is host name, all those things. So now if I run this command, now if you see this command is now successful and I got back information about my host. I will not be able to share the whole details because this contains information about my system, but you can see information, for example, uptime, right? User's home directory, the user that connected to the remote host. What is the group ID for the user? What is the virtualization type? Like we know that it is running on WSL. And if you want, we can also use subset command. Later on, we will talk about it. So let's say you don't want to get all the facts about your remote machine. You just want to have the subset, for example, just IP information or OS related information. You can use subset command also. All this information is available in this index. So for example, if I click on this setup module now, this has redirected me to the setup module documentation. And now it has five sections. One is synopsis, then parameters, attributes, and notes. And the most important one is this one, where it mentions all the parameters that are supported by setup module. And then we have the example section, which gives us example on how to use this particular module. These all examples are for the playbooks as well as for the ad-hoc command. So for example, here you can see that if we want to just only collect facts, written by Factor. Factor is a tool installed available in Linux, and in some OS this is not available. And similarly, there are other variations available also. If you want, you can use them. Right? So you'll get all type of examples in the same documentation, and you don't even have to go to some other website to look for the for examples. But generally speaking, each module documentation would have enough information available for you to use that module and see what are the different parameters available with that module and different examples on how to use that module. Okay, so in this video, we talked about what Ansible is, why to use Ansible, what are some of its advantages. We also looked into a periodic table created by digital.ai, where Ansible fits into configuration management automation tools category. We also looked into how to install WSL briefly on a Windows machine and how to install Ansible on Ubuntu machine running on a Windows WSL system. We also looked into installing and running OpenSSH server on WSL machine so that we can run Ansible playbooks and ad hoc commands against the same server. And we also looked into how to look for modules in Ansible documentation. And we also ran a simple Ansible module to ping our remote host, which in our case was the local host, using our user ID without enabling passwordless SSH. I hope you liked this video. I will be creating few more videos about Ansible where I would be covering how to create playbooks roles in Ansible along with lookups and Jinja 2 templates. Thank you for your time. Bye for now.